Have you ever been silenced for simply existing in the place where the foundation was once? That day, I just wanted to see my great-grandson, a baby with big eyes and an easy smile, who always recognized me by my voice. But before I could approach the crib, my daughter-in-law placed her hand in front of my chest as if barring a stranger, and she said, with the coldness of someone who believes what they're saying, "He needs good energy. I don't want him near you." I froze. I stood there, still, trying to understand if I'd heard correctly. It was me, the great-grandmother, the woman who cared for 3 children, supported 2 ungrateful sons-in-law, welcomed grandchildren, sewed blankets, made soup on feverish nights. But to her, at that moment, I was just an invisible threat. As if my age, or perhaps my pain, were contagious. As if a grandmother's love was no longer welcome. Have you ever been through this? Have you ever felt like you suddenly became small within your own story? Stay with me until the end, because what happened next, not even I could have predicted. That phrase kept ringing in my head for days. Your energy is heavy. I never thought I'd hear something like this, especially from someone I once welcomed with affection. What is this if not emotional ageism, a modern, spiritualized way of calling us useless, without actually using those words? In the following days, I was silenced without being told it was censorship. I was pushed aside without being told it was exclusion. They kept me close, but far away. Do you understand this kind of pain, when they tell you you can stay, but it's better if you don't touch, don't give your opinion, don't interfere? They think we don't notice, but we do. We feel it in their eyes, their tone, their silence. Every time they talked about energy, spiritual protection, the house's vibration. I understood the message. I wasn't as welcome as I once was. I started looking out the window more than usual. I sat there, like so many other ladies I've seen and admired, waiting, not for visitors, because we learn not to expect what doesn't come, but hoping that, at some point, respect would return, or that, at least, someone would notice that I was still there, alive, lucid, full of history and love. We grow old with our bodies, but our grandmother's heart remains young. Nobody understands that, or pretends not to. And it was on one of those afternoons, watching the sky change colors, that I had a flash of insight, a thought that had never occurred to me before. It wasn't about revenge, it was about truth, about divine justice, about showing who I truly am, not with words, but with actions. And in that moment, even in silence, I began to form a plan, not out of pride, but out of dignity. You will understand how I realized in time to protect myself, and how, behind that silent woman, there was a whole story that no one there knew. And that's how it all began. I didn't tell anyone at first. I kept it all to myself, as we always do. But inside, something was changing. It wasn't just sadness anymore. It was a mixture of shame and anger, as if I'd been ripped from my proper place in the family. I became a kind of ghost, present, but invisible. And you know what hurt the most? It wasn't my daughter-in-law's words. It was the silence of the others. My son, who was in the living room, heard everything and said nothing. My grandchildren continued on their cell phones, as if I weren't there, as if that humiliation were normal. And maybe, for them, it is. That's what scares me. If anything in this story has upset you, leave a comment below to tell us what bothered you most. Or, if you've ever experienced something similar, right? Because when we share, the pain doesn't disappear, but it becomes lighter, and you might end up being the voice someone else needed to hear. If this kind of story touches your heart, if you feel these truths need to be told, then hit the like button. It may seem like a small gesture, but it gets this message across to those who need it. Sometimes, it's a video like this that saves someone's day. And if you want to keep hearing real stories like this, stories no one tells, but everyone feels, subscribe to the channel. Here, each narrative is a mirror, a way to remember that we still matter, that our voices still have power, that lived love doesn't expire. Now, let me tell you what happened when I finally broke the silence. Because it was there, at that very moment, that everything began to change. My name is Dorothy. I'm 78 years old, have 2 scars on my left hand, and a box of letters I never delivered. For a long time, I was many things. Wife to a man who left too soon. Mother to 3 children who became my world catechist at the neighborhood church. Neighborhood seamstress. Friend to those who needed a listening ear. But before all that, I was a girl, a poor girl from the countryside who learned early on that love is proven in silence, that those who cry too much get in the way, that the strongest are those who swallow everything and still serve coffee with a smile. I spent my life believing this. I gave myself completely. I completely annulled myself. I got tired of saying everything's fine when it wasn't. I became the woman who does everything, solves everything, holds everything together. And now, at almost 80, I'm treated as if I have nothing left to offer, as if my presence were a delay, as if I were just a reminder of the time they pretend doesn't pass. Perhaps what hurts most isn't the physical separation, it's the emotional absence. It's being inside the house, but outside the heart, sitting on the same couch, hearing the same laughter, but feeling like you no longer belong there. Have you ever felt that way? It's like watching a movie you wrote but weren't invited to be in. You recognize the characters, remember the lines, know the ending, but no one looks you in the eye. The other day, my granddaughter commented that her baby's clothes had gotten a strange smell after I held them. She laughed, as if it were a joke, but I heard what was behind it. I always do. Contempt doesn't need to be shouted. It knows how to whisper, how to disguise itself as a casual comment, a gentle suggestion. You should get more rest, Grandma. Don't worry, we'll manage. You don't need to worry about that now. It all seems like affection. Until you understand, it's not about care. It's about distancing. There are days when I look in the mirror and don't recognize who I once was. Where did that woman who climbed stairs with heavy bags, who shopped in the morning and brought rice and beans for 7 at night, go? Where's the Dorothy who sang to the radio while ironing, who tended the plants on the porch with her hands full of soap? They turned me into a shadow. And the saddest thing is that, for a while, I accepted that role. But the hidden truth is that the love we give leaves its mark, even when they try to erase us. Even when they think they're sparing us, in reality, they're sparing themselves from dealing with what they don't want to see, their fragility in the face of our wisdom, the guilt that hits when they realize they don't have time, but we miss them. It was on an ordinary day, amidst the smell of coffee and the distant sound of the TV, that I realized no one was going to give me back my place in this family. I would have to reclaim it myself, not by shouting, but by presence, by action. With a decision that would change everything, because when an old woman, as they like to say, decides to remember who she is, there's no system that can silence her. And it wasn't easy, because before facing others, I had to face my own fears, the fear of bothering others, of being seen as bitter, of being the one who doesn't know when to stop. But I did. I knew when to stop, when to accept crumbs. Now tell me, if you've come this far, and any phrase touched your heart, write just one word in the comments. Dignity, because it is with her that this story begins to change. It was an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the smell of fresh coffee mingles with the noise of the television on just for company. I was in the kitchen, folding dish towels and listening to life unfold in the living room. Voices, laughter, and then words. Words that changed everything. He needs young, vibrant people around. Yes, these old energies weigh on the environment. She doesn't even realize it. But the atmosphere changes when she walks in. I stopped. My hands froze on the cloth. My heart seemed to take a step back. Those voices I knew so well, my son, my daughter-in-law, a friend of hers, spoke as if I didn't exist. And, in a way, in that moment, I didn't. It was as if I were part of the house's furniture. Someone who was there but didn't count, didn't need to be consulted or respected. That it wasn't just a conversation. It was an unsolicited diagnosis of my presence, of my essence, of my usefulness. I, who for decades had been the foundation of that family, was now treated like noise, a burden, a negative energy, as if love had an expiration date, as if history were something to be thrown away when it expires. Do you know what hurt me the most? It wasn't the cruelty of the words, because we've learned to swallow that over time. It was the naturalness with which they came out, without guilt, without hesitation, as if it were obvious, as if there were nothing wrong with excluding someone on the inside while pretending to include them on the outside. It was as if I were responsible for everything bad that happened there. The child cries, it must be my presence. The plant wilts, my energy. The food doesn't agree with me. Maybe I've contaminated it with my outdated grandmother vibe. It's not just prejudice. It's a collective mindset that romanticizes youth and demonizes aging. And this goes far beyond appearance. It's spiritual, it's emotional, it's invisible. And, for that very reason, it's even crueler. They called me toxic without using that word. They excluded me without locking the door. They dehumanized me while smiling. There, standing with the dishcloth in my hands and my heart silent, I experienced a kind of mourning, a mourning for everything I still was but which they refused to see. Because the truth is, the problem isn't age. It's blindness. It's not seeing the value of those who have been through things they can't even imagine. And the strangest thing is that they still ask me for advice. They still say, "Grandma, how did you make that tea?" Or "Do you remember how to make this?" But only until my presence begins to shine too brightly. Then they back off. Then comes the talk of good energy. Because it's easier to discredit someone than to admit that perhaps we're wrong. This betrayal involved no shouting, no scene, no fight. It was subtle, but the impact was profound, like a crack that pierces the soul and remains invisible to those who don't want to look. In that instant, I knew everything had changed, that the house was no longer mine, that I was a guest, or worse, a spiritual noise being controlled. But I said nothing. I remained there, folding the cloths, breathing deeply, not out of fear, but out of strategy, because sometimes silence is the only way to hear clearly what the world is trying to show you, and what I saw was revelatory. From that moment on, a transformation began to take place within me. It wasn't planned, it was instinctive, organic. An ancient, dormant force began to awaken. Something inside me said, "Don't shut yourself out. Don't accept it, don't bow down." And so it was that, still without knowing how, I began to craft my response, not to attack them, but to remind myself who I am, and who I've always been. If any of this resonated with you, write a phrase in the comments that has represented me since the beginning of this journey. I've always been here. That night, I didn't cry. And that's when I realized something inside me had changed. Instead of the lump in my throat that always accompanied me when I felt discarded, there was a different silence, a kind of pause that comes before decision, a pause that carries weight, but also direction. It was as if my soul, tired of swallowing injustice in silence, said, "Enough. Now you will remember who you are." I walked slowly to my room, with the measured steps of someone who's already realized there's no point in rushing. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around. The old picture frames, the letters from my grandchildren when they still knew how to draw with colored pencils, the scraps I'd been setting aside to one day make a quilt no one asked for. Everything there seemed suspended in time, waiting for me. But I wasn't waiting anymore. I had decided to act. I grabbed my sewing box, the one that had been with me since the 1970s, with its bent pins, frayed thread, and scissors only I knew how to use properly. It wasn't just a sewing box. It was a piece of my identity. It was the tool with which I rebuilt the world when it fell apart. A fallen pant leg, a broken zipper, a doll torn apart by childhood. That night, sewing was more than repairing. It was resisting. I chose a light blue fabric. Delicate it was, my favorite. The one I'd saved to make something special for my great-grandson. I remembered the first time I saw the ultrasound. I cried alone, on the porch, with emotion. That child, even without knowing it, already carried an invisible bond with me. And it was for him, for this love that doesn't need permission to exist, that I would begin my plan. It wasn't a plan for revenge. There was no room for anger. There was room for dignity. There was room for presence. There was room for a silent transformation. The kind no one notices until it's too late. Because when a woman like me rises from within, she doesn't need speech. She moves with intention, and the impact is inevitable. The hidden truth that no one understands is that our time of silence isn't empty. It's maturation, it's construction, it's a framework of strength. As the stitches lined up on the fabric, I thought, how many times have I kept quiet to avoid conflict? How many times have I accepted less than I deserved to maintain peace? And what have I gained from this? Invisibility. When we don't assert ourselves, the world slowly erases us, and they think we're disappearing. But in truth, we're storing energy. And one day, that energy returns not as revenge, but as clarity. And clarity is powerful. I finished the gift almost at dawn. A small vest for my great-grandson. Blue as the morning sky he's yet to discover. Simple, beautiful, filled with invisible affection in every stitch. But more than that, it was my symbol. A reminder that I exist, that I have a history, that I deserve space, even if they don't yet see it. As I carefully folded the vest, I realized something had ignited inside me. It wasn't fury. It was determination. I wouldn't leave that house like someone who'd been kicked out. I would stay present, strategically present. I would no longer be the grandmother who serves tea and retreats. I would be the grandmother who, even in silence, transforms the environment, because presence is a decision, and I had decided to take my place. They didn't know it yet, but I had already started to change everything. And the best part, without raising my voice, without stooping to insults, just being who I am but with more courage. If you understood what this silent turn means, write the phrase here in the comments. I sowed my strength. The next day, I got up earlier than usual. The sky was still a bit gray, and the house was silent. As I made my coffee, I realized how silence can also be an ally. It leaves space to hear thoughts that the rush of others drowns out. I sat on the porch with my old notebook and began what I called my little mission. Every day from then on, I would write a letter to Elliot. It didn't matter if he couldn't read yet, if he didn't understand the world. One day, he would understand. One day, someone would show him what his great-grandmother left behind. And it wouldn't be an inheritance of possessions, it would be of memory, of feeling, of hidden truth that only time reveals. That in the first letter, I told you about the street where I grew up, the loose stones, Mr. Arthur's shop, the mango tree that marked the seasons. I talked about how, at 8 years old, I was already taking care of my younger sister and bringing home bread even when hunger lived in the kitchen. It wasn't drama, it was life, it was history. And history, my dear, doesn't fade just because it grows old. The second letter was about the first time I felt truly afraid, when my father fell ill and my mother looked at me as if to say, without words, that I needed to grow up sooner. And I did, not because I wanted to, but because it was either that or collapse. I wrote about this to Elliot because one day, he too will feel afraid, and maybe remembering his great-grandmother will help him through it. Letters became part of my daily ritual. While my family lived as if I weren't there, I wrote, I observed, I listened to what wasn't said, and, silently, I left my legacy on paper. There was no intention of confronting anyone. It was a journey of reconnection with myself. Each written page was a stitch in my soul, a rescue, a reunion with the woman I was and the woman I was becoming. I began to realize that strength isn't in being heard. It's in knowing that, even in silence, you carry something that time cannot destroy. Truth. And truth, even when ignored, lives on. Sometimes I'd leave the letters in strategic places. A hot drawer, a box in the living room closet, an envelope forgotten on the shelf. I knew someone would find them eventually. And when they did, there would be no way to pretend I didn't know. It was my way of planting seeds of memory, seeds of awareness. Because, you see, when you plant love with truth, sooner or later, it blossoms, even if it's in the hearts of those who don't even know they need it. Some days, my son would look at me strangely. He noticed something different about me, but he didn't ask. Maybe out of fear, maybe out of guilt. His daughter kept her distance, cordial, but cold. And me, I let her. Because I knew what I was doing wasn't just for me. It was a change of mindset, a legacy choice, the kind of decision that reverberates through generations. Even if it's not immediately recognized. In one of my letters, I told Elliot about the day I lost a baby, a life that had barely begun, but taught me more than entire years. I spoke of the pain, but also of the love that remained, and how that episode transformed me. Because it's behind the scenes of pain that we learn to be who we are. And these are the stories no one tells, the ones hidden between the lines of the smiles of those who have endured what the world can't even imagine. My plan was simple, to leave my mark, to show, gently and firmly, that I was never the bad energy in the story. I was, and always have been, the heart beating silently at the center of everything. But sometimes, the heart needs to step aside so that others miss what it does unseen. If this journey brought back memories or awakened something within you, write in the comments, my story matters. As the days passed, I realized that what was happening to me wasn't an isolated incident. It was like a social rift, subtle but profound, beginning to reveal itself in the banal conversations and long silences. At the bakery, I met Donna Lena, a neighbor with very white hair and still vivid eyes. As we waited for the bread to come out of the oven, she looked at me and said, quietly, as if confessing a secret, They don't let me hold my grandson anymore either. They say my energy disturbs his sleep, and I understood everything. In that moment, I understood that there was something much greater than my individual pain. It was a movement disguised as care, a new guise for the old fear of aging, an exclusion disguised as spirituality. I returned home with my heart on edge. I began to pay closer attention. I heard similar stories from other women, in different tones, with different words, but with the same underlying pain. My daughter says the baby gets agitated after I spend the day with her. My daughter-in-law sends videos about energy cleansing every time I come to visit. I was asked not to pray near the crib. All of this sounded so familiar. It sounded like a script from a sad movie, but it was reality. A reality lived in silence by women like me. Women who were once pillars, but are now treated like shadows. It wasn't long before everything began to connect. The stares, the distancing for the child's sake, the invitations that no longer came. They called it protection, but it was rejection. It was a spiritual ageism disguised as energetic evolution. And, while it revolted me, it made me wonder, how did we get here? How did a generation raised in the lap of these women come to see them as a threat? I remembered the birth of my oldest son. It was at home, with a midwife. I was scared, but I didn't show it. I remember the hot water, the smell of alcohol, the makeshift towel. I was 22 years old, with a courage I didn't even know existed, and no one there talked about energy. They only talked about presence, about love, about doing what needed to be done. Later, when he grew up, I was the one who nursed him through long fevers, who held him in my arms during asthma attacks, who stayed up all night just to hear him breathing. And now, he tells me with downcast eyes that it's best if I don't get too close to the baby, that he needs to preserve the harmony of the house. The hidden truth behind all this is that, somewhere along this journey, we begin to believe that wisdom ages along with the body. We forget that there is a silent power in those who have been through everything and remain standing. That there is an ancient strength in those who have seen death up close, who have buried loved ones, who have been reborn after losses beyond words. And that's why we bother. Because, deep down, our presence reveals what many don't want to see. That one day, they will all be here exactly where we are now. The letters I wrote began to carry more than stories. They became small manifestos, pieces of a puzzle that perhaps only Eliot will one day put together. In one of them, I told how faith sustained me during the years my husband was ill. I spoke of the times when there was no money, but there was hope, and how I learned that love, when true, doesn't need to be explained. It can be felt. It endures. Even when the body ages, even when the eyes no longer see clearly, love remains. I understood that my plan was no longer about being accepted back into that living room. It was about something bigger. It was about breaking a cycle, showing, gently and firmly, that a woman who has lived so long cannot be discarded, that abandonment cannot be spiritualized, that prejudice cannot be lulled into shape with pretty words. My silence became resistance, and my routine became a symbol of something not everyone can see but that one day they will miss. If you've ever seen this pattern hidden behind good intentions, write it in the comments. That has another name. And while all this was happening, disguised distancing, the veiled conversations, the smiles that concealed rejection, I remained steadfast, writing, observing, connecting memories like someone piecing together a puzzle of the soul. The pain was still there, of course, but now it was different. It was a more conscious pain, one that no longer paralyzed. It was the pain that pushes forward, that transforms silence into decision. And I know that, right now, you might be remembering something similar, a phrase that hurt you more than it should have, a subtle gesture that erased you, an absence you pretended not to notice. If so, share it here in the comments, because when we express it, the pain finds an echo, and you might end up writing exactly what someone else needs to read to feel less alone. If this kind of story speaks to you, if it awakens emotions you might not even have known were hidden, please leave a like. This simple gesture helps this content reach those who also need to hear, or remember that they are not alone. And if you feel this channel is a place where your pain finds space, where your memories make sense, where your voice still matters, subscribe, because it's this community that makes this exist. It's you on the other side who keeps this conversation alive. And that's why each new video brings more truth, more depth, more dedication. I have so much more to tell. And maybe, in the midst of what I've experienced, you'll find something of your own too. Elliot's birthday arrived with that air of a well-staged celebration. Blue balloons on the chairs, a two-tiered cake covered in white frosting, children's music playing in the background as if nothing could hurt in that setting. I was sitting, as always, on the sidelines, part of the scenery, but not the plot. I wore my best outfit and a small smile, the kind we learn to use when we want to appear present, even when our hearts are on the outside and the middle of the party. While the adults laughed loudly and the children ran around the yard, Ellie appeared with the wooden box in his hands, the same one that, for weeks, had held my letters, all handwritten, with words thoughtfully crafted as if each one were a piece of me I'd given him. He didn't know what was inside, of course. He was only 5 years old. But he held it with a care that put me on edge. Children sense things adults pretend not to notice. "Mommy, what's this?" he asked, lifting the box into the air, his eyes wide with curiosity. The room fell silent for an imperceptible moment. My daughter-in-law approached, slowly, with that forced smile that comes when the soul loses control of the body. She picked up the box and recognized it immediately. She spent a few seconds looking at the stacked letters, the ribbons I'd tied myself, the dates written on the corner of each envelope. "Did Grandma make it for me?" he asked again, and his voice pierced the air like a beam of light. She hesitated. She tried to hide it, but the letters slipped a little from the open lid. And there was one of my writings, the handwriting shaky but firm, talking about the day he was born, about the scent of lavender I prepared on the towel, about the prayer I said quietly outside the hospital, without anyone knowing. She said nothing. She just quickly closed the box and tried to change the subject. But the child insisted, "Why can't Grandma ever come here?" This time, the question hung in the air. She found no excuses. There was no way she could talk about energy in front of a boy with such a clear gaze, because a child's gaze is like a fine blade. It cuts effortlessly, without shouting, but goes straight to the truth. I remained in my corner. I didn't stand up. I didn't argue. I just took a deep breath and looked at Elliot with the same affection. As always, Andy returned it with a smile that says more than any words. It was as if, even without reading a single line, he understood everything, because love is felt. Love doesn't need to be spelled out. My son, who had been watching from afar until then, approached the box and pulled out one of the letters. He read the first paragraph quietly, and when his eyes met mine, there was something different there. It wasn't just regret, it was memory. It was a reunion with everything he'd tried to forget or hide for years. And I saw, in that instant, the crack that was beginning to open up inside him, not out of revenge, but out of revelation. The room remained silent. Those letters I wrote in the dark, unsure if anyone would ever read them, now stood there, at the center of the party, as witnesses to a truth no one could ignore. A simple, silent, yet powerful truth. I never stopped loving. I never stopped being there, even when they said my energy was too much, or too little, or out of place. If this reminded you of someone who also left invisible marks, write in the comments. I never stopped being here. The box of letters sat there, on the coffee table, like a living presence. It didn't take up space, it occupied consciousness. It was as if, suddenly, that small object had revealed something no one had dared to say out loud. I never stopped belonging. I was only left aside by decisions disguised as care. Decisions that came with sweet words, but that, deep down, hid a deep fear of old age, of wisdom, of what cannot be controlled. My son, the letter still in his hands, approached slowly. It was as if each step was driven by years of silence. He sat beside me and simply said, "I'm sorry, Mom." He didn't apologize with speeches. He apologized with his eyes. And I knew that behind all the actions that drove me away, there was more ignorance than malice, more fear than cruelty. They couldn't handle what I represented with the vivid memory of everything that doesn't fit into the happy internet posts, with the truth that bothers because it can't be cancelled. My daughter-in-law, for her part, took a while to approach. She came slowly, as if unsure if she'd be accepted. And in that moment, I didn't want to humiliate. I didn't want to demand. I didn't want to show power. Because those who carry true love don't need revenge. She stopped in front of me and said, almost in a whisper, "We thought we were protecting him." And I thought, protect him from what? From affection, from his roots, from his living history. But I said nothing. I simply held her hand. Because when justice comes, it doesn't need to be violent. It needs to be firm. And there, holding that trembling hand, I knew justice had been served. They called it a modern energy practice. They said they were following spiritual guidance about clean environments, balanced vibrations, and neutral presences. But the heart, no one can fool that. The heart knows when something is wrong, even if the mind tries to justify it. And in that moment, their heart spoke louder than any esoteric theory, any social media video, any fear disguised as tradition. What they did to me wasn't just a physical separation, it was an emotional erasure. A subtle message that, after a certain age, the best thing we can do is disappear gracefully. But I didn't disappear. I stayed, I waited, I observed, and I acted. My response was constructed with patience. It was crafted with the same delicacy with which I've always cared for this family, because true strength is silent. It doesn't impose, it doesn't shout, it transforms. It was on that day that I realized something even greater. This story wasn't just mine. It belonged to many other women. Women who, like me, were discredited for being from another time, with another energy, with another vision. As if age makes us less capable of loving, caring, belonging. As if accumulated wisdom were a burden, not a treasure. That late afternoon, after the birthday greetings and the cake cutting, the house was different. Not in the furniture, nor in the walls, but in the air. The atmosphere that had previously been one of silent tension now held something I hadn't felt in a long time: respect. And respect is the first step to any true transformation. When it arrives, it paves the way for recognition, for listening, for reparation. I didn't need to raise my voice to regain my place. I just needed to stand firm. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson I can teach. Because sometimes, divine justice doesn't come with thunder. It comes with broken looks, with sincere apologies, with silences that say more than any rehearsed speech. If this reminded you of a situation where the truth won, even in silence, write in the comments. Respect is not asked for, it is sown today. Elliot runs to me as if I were a safe place. He hugs me tightly, nestles in my lap, and calls me grandma of the heart. Sometimes he cups my face with both hands and asks if I'm happy. And I answer yes, even when my throat tightens. Because, in that moment, he's not asking with words, he's asking with his soul. He wants to know if I truly exist now. If that bond that was tied in silence, letter by letter, gesture by gesture, still pulses and pulses. Yes, I won. I regained my place, my respect. The clear gaze of the family that, for so long, saw me as a shadow. But the truth no one likes to hear is that every victory has a price. And mine was high. I lost many Sundays, lost first words, lost birthdays, with candles I didn't blow out, drawings I didn't get, kisses that didn't come. I lost the chance to be part of moments that now only live in albums I don't open. Because, even with forgiveness, some pages of history remain torn. There were afternoons when the laughter of the house didn't include me, when I baked a cake, hoping to be invited, but the invitation never came. There were nights when the sound of fireworks in the street was a reminder that there was a party, but not for me. And in those moments, it wasn't anger I felt. It was a kind of mourning. A silent mourning for everything that could have been but wasn't. For everything they took from me without even saying they were taking it away. The hardest part wasn't dealing with the exclusion. It was understanding that it came from the people I loved most. From those I carried in my womb, in my arms, in my nightly prayers. People for whom I faced hospital lines, bank loans, personal sacrifices. And realizing that all this love wasn't enough to protect me from judgment disguised as evolution. It hurts. But it was also in this process that I transformed myself, that my perspective changed. I learned that I can't control how others see me, but I can decide how I position myself in the face of what they try to impose on me. I learned not to demand space, but to occupy it. Not to justify my presence, but to live it with dignity. I discovered that sometimes you have to let the world miss you for it to realize your worth. The marks remain, not like open wounds, but like scars that tell stories, scars that say, I was here, I was forgotten, but I didn't disappear. I was hurt, but I didn't harden. I chose to keep loving, even when love seemed to never return. Elliot hugs me every day, and when he says he loves me, in that soft, sincere voice, I believe him, because children don't lie with their hearts. And it's through him that I reconnect with everything I've lost. Every hug is a reunion. Every smile, a point of light sewn into the fabric of the absence I've experienced. But still, there's a subtle emptiness, a space that only those who were left behind can understand. Perhaps this is the biggest backstory of this whole story, the hardest revelation, that even when we forgive, something inside us shifts. Not out of resentment, but out of protection. And that's why today, even with victory, I walk with slower steps, not in age, but in awareness, because now I know what's worth it. I know what it costs. I know what remains. If you've ever experienced a victory that cost you more than you imagined, write here in the comments. I won, but I bled. And in the end, after everything I've been through, I understood that true love has no time limit, no measure, no single way of showing itself. It persists, even when ignored, endures even when misunderstood, and flourishes even when pushed to the sidelines. Because the love of someone who has lived a long life isn't noisy, it's a constant light. It's the kind of presence that doesn't need to be announced, but whose absence is felt in the densest silence of the house. I'm not the same as before. And honestly, I don't want to. Because now I have a clarity I didn't have before, a vision that only comes after we've crossed the valley of invisibility. After you learn to see yourself even when no one else sees you, this changes everything. It changes your posture, your listening, even the way you say good morning. It changes your expectations. Before, I expected recognition to come from outside. Now, I recognize myself, and that's enough. People think time takes everything away, that it wears us down, erases us, weakens us. But what I've learned is that time actually reveals. It reveals what's true. It reveals who remains. It reveals the impact of decisions. It doesn't forgive what was done wrong, but it gives us the chance to correct it if we have the courage. And, above all, time reveals who we truly are, when everything we pretended to be no longer makes sense. Today, I walk differently. I no longer rush to please, nor do I diminish myself to fit in. I've learned to occupy my space with kindness and firmness. I've learned that I don't need to prove anything to anyone. Those who want to see. Those who don't, one day feel. And I don't say this with arrogance. I say it with peace. Because when we survive emotional exclusion, we learn to wisely choose where it's worth spending. Life has its hidden behind-the-scenes moments. Moments no one saw, but which shaped who we became. And mine, for a long time, were sewn together in silence, on kitchen stools, in whispered prayers, in tears wiped away, before anyone noticed. Today, I no longer hide. I no longer need to hide, because even my pain deserves a place at the table. It's as much a part of me as my smiles. And if there's one thing I want to leave as a legacy, it's precisely this, that every story we live has value, even if they try to downplay it, even if they say it's over. Nothing ever goes away when it was real. I watch Elliot grow up now with a different perspective, and sometimes, when he watches me silently, I wonder what's going through his head, if he'll ever remember all of this, if he'll understand what happened, and most importantly, if he'll carry this memory forward. Because that's how we change. A generation when we plant awareness in a heart that's just beginning to beat for the world. We don't need titles to be a beacon, just live truthfully, just love with dignity. Because those who have love within them radiate, and if they transmit light, why would anyone try to extinguish it? Only those who can't bear its reflection fear the light, and perhaps that's why so many prefer silence around their elders. Because our history reflects what many haven't yet had the courage to face, time, and time exacts its toll. It exacts its toll for absences. It exacts its toll for unspoken words. It exacts its toll for neglected affections. But it also rewards. And I know my reward didn't come in celebration, nor in applause. It came in restored glances, in lingering embraces, in memories rescued. If this touched any part of your life, write it in the comments. Love doesn't grow old. If you've stuck with me this far, I can only thank you truly, because telling all this requires dedication, but listening also requires an open heart. And if this video touched any memory of yours, any pain you've swallowed in silence, or any longing that lives quietly inside, leave a comment saying, "That message was for me." So I know you made it to the end, and that we are connected by something beyond words. If this kind of story helps you see your own experiences more clearly, strengthens you, or simply makes you feel less alone, subscribe to the channel. Here, each video is made with the soul, because I believe that when we share our true experiences, we shine a light on someone's life. And if at any point you felt like this conversation was for you, leave a like. This shows that it's worth continuing to bring you content like this, real, deep, and full of meaning. There's a video here that complements this topic. Click and continue with me there. The conversation doesn't end here.